Friends, our keynote speaker is a man who has stood long for his principles. He's a man I have admired a long time. Don't always agree with him, but that's okay. I don't always agree with my wife. So there you go. Ladies and gentlemen, here to deliver to us our keynote speech for this fourth annual Gathering of the Eagles, please give a warm welcome to Congressman Tom DeLay.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. I got to tell you, after listening to Thomas Paine, I'm ready to go home and go to work. You don't need to hear a speech from me after that. It reminded me, I was sitting there listening to him and just in awe of how articulate he is and how fired up he is and how he wants to really make things happen. And it recalled some of you more senior citizens like me may remember Johnny Carson, the Johnny Carson show. There was one famous show on Johnny Carson that is shown over and over and over again. And they had a cat, first out that night was Bob Hope. And the second out was Frank Sinatra. The third out was Dean Martin. And the last one out was a guy named George Goebel. Hey, remember? You remember that incident? And George Goebel's sitting in the Target chair, and he's sitting there talking. And George's biggest shtick was he was dumb, and he was sitting there, and he had a drink in his hand, and he was sitting there in the chair. And Dean Martin was next to him, and Dean was flipping ashes in his cup. And George Goebel looked up and down a row of Bob Hope, Dean Martin, and Frank Sinatra, and he looked right straight at the camera and he said, "Do you ever feel like the whole world is a tuxedo and you're a pair of brown shoes?" That's the way I feel following Basso. I'd much rather had a chimpanzee act up here or something like that to follow. And one of the other things that touched me about this whole program was Pastor Aaron. Oh, there he is. I really appreciated your opening invocation and your statements. And it kept ringing through my head. What he exemplified was separation of church and state God's way. It was just very inspiring, and I greatly appreciate it. And I wished I was from Oregon so I could run around and follow you camp to camp. Because I can imagine what that would be. But I look out over this crowd, and I just want to say, hello, fellow extremists. You look to me like you're outside agitators. It's amazing. As I look into your faces, it's just amazing how crazy you look. It's just incredible. As I've watched this whole movement develop, it's amazing. It didn't take any leadership for this movement to develop. It was people wanting, as Bob said, to take their country back. And I remember distinctly that I happened to be in Washington, D.C., which I don't go to much anymore. It's very depressing. I happened to be in Washington, D.C. the day that the House of Representatives passed Obamacare. Remember that day? Some of you may have been there. There was well over 30,000 people that were standing on the western side of the Capitol and stood there for at least 3 hours or more. They had dropped everything that they were doing. And I forget who it was that called it. May have been Michelle Bachmann. Put out a call to people from all over the country to come to protest the passage of Obamacare. And I had not been around too many people in this movement, so I just wanted to go and see what this was all about. And I went and spent 3 hours just walking through the crowd. I wasn't invited to be a speaker there. I wasn't part of the movement. I was just wanted to be, just to see what all these extremists were about. And it was, and as I look across this crowd underneath this tent with rain and fog on the outside, you don't look any different than those people that were standing on the western front of the Capitol. just ordinary Americans, not extremists. I mean, you look right over here at this table. I see 3 young babies, and I think there's a baby and a tot. And this mama, I was watching her, kneeling down on her knees in the wet, feeding her baby. That's America. That's no extremist. That's no crazy idiot. That's Americans. You know, you're being accused of these things because you're not listening. You're not listening to Obama. What's the matter with you? You must be crazy because you're not listening. He told you from the very beginning that this economy was the worst economy since the Great Depression. Now, I remember when I first got into politics and ran in 1978, getting ready for Ronald Reagan in 1980. I remember what the economy was then. The unemployment was over 12%. Inflation was over 21%. I had just bought a house and was paying 13% interest on my mortgage. You remember those days? I think that's a little worse than the economy that we got here. And I remember who caused it. Jimmy Carter. Remember Jimmy Carter? Well, you know, this Obama administration is making Jimmy Carter look good. It's just, I can remember that in 2001, a new president was inaugurated, George W. Bush. And all of a sudden, right before he was even sworn in, the unemployment rate rose to 5.6%. And I remember all the lame duck media talking about how he was Herbert Hoover. The world was coming to an end. Now, he went, because he would not use the government to get us out of this recession that we were in, this horrible, horrible recession that we were in. He refused to overregulate. He refused to spend. What he did was cut taxes. And he cut the capital gains rate. And the economy started taking off, even though we had 9/11. And what it did to it started taking off because people started taking off. And yet, you're crazy if you don't believe that all the Obamonomics, it would be even worse if we didn't have the Obamonomics. It would be horrible. What would it have been? What would it have been if we let all those financial institutions fail and let the financial institutions that are in good shape, making good decisions, fill in the gap? What would have happened? What would have happened if we'd have taken those people that were giving people loans at subprime mortgage rates that could not afford the loans? What if we just let them fail? Where would we be today? I guarantee I know where we'd be today. We'd be a lot better off. There would be certainty in the future. We wouldn't have a $13 trillion debt. We wouldn't have monthly deficits that are higher than any annual deficit during the Bush administration. Think about that. The monthly deficits that they're running right now are higher than any annual deficit in the Bush administration. This is scary. We are about to the point that the interest alone on this $13+ trillion deficit is going to be more per year than what we spend for the defense of this country. Well, you're crazy. Obviously, you don't understand. You're just extremists. Well, you have understood, and as Bob has said, you have hit the streets. You're here today. The American people are gravitating towards you. You've done a fabulous job. I can remember being here last year, and the thing I was calling for, I'm sure you didn't do it because I was calling for it, but you did it because you knew it was important to leverage this wonderful movement. What I was calling for was organization, coordination, and communications. And that's what happened over this last year. That's exactly what you did. You started working together. You started recruiting candidates, and those candidates that were coming from the private sector got into the mix and started running for office. What you were doing was, whether you like it or not, you were building a party. And what part, and that's, after the election of 08, the Republican Party, the quote conservative party, was at the worst of the bottom. And now it is the strongest it's ever been in the history of the United States because of you. Because you've built something here that's meaningful and unbelievable. And in 45 days, it's gonna show itself to be the most incredible election that we have seen in our lifetimes. I have never seen it like this. That's why people ask me, well, how are we going to do? Because I'm pretty good at prognosticating or predicting the election. I can't predict the election because I've never seen in my lifetime or my political career the events and the situation that we find ourselves today. Never. And some people are saying we haven't seen this since 1926. I don't think we've seen this kind of uprising by the American people at least since the Civil War, because the American people are speaking out and are being heard and are demanding that their elected officials listen to them, and they're starting to hear you. Not all of them, but some of them are starting to hear you. I mean, it is amazing to me, and it's a different time. But just last Tuesday in Delaware, a quote Tea Party candidate. Actually, she's a true blue, true believing conservative, beat the most liberal Republican to ever serve in the Congress of the United States. And some of those elitists, Republican as well as Democrats, went on television saying she'll never win. Well, I'm telling you now, I think she is going to win. But the point is, it doesn't matter. What has happened is someone came out and ran for office standing on principle. And the people rallied around her. And a record turnout in Delaware happened on that primary day in Delaware. And this has happened all across the country, here in Oregon and everywhere else. The turnouts have been unbelievable, unlike anything I've ever seen. So I can't predict what's going to happen. I hope this energy and this enthusiasm sweeps like a tsunami across this country, starting on the East Coast and ends up here in Oregon. And we wake up on November the 3rd with the most significant election and turnaround and revolution that we have seen in our lifetimes. I hope that's going to happen, and I feel it down in my gut that